My ex-girlfriend invited me to her wedding to flaunt her wealthy fiancé, but my plus one turned the tables in the most unexpected way. Madison, 30, female, and I, 22, male, met while working part-time at Starbucks. At the time, I was still in college, saving up to move out of my parents' house permanently. Madison was paying off her student loans, as her parents, burdened with gambling debts, couldn't support her financially. We initially bonded over our family struggles, but soon realized we genuinely enjoyed spending time together. 2 years later, after I graduated, I had saved enough to move out and live on my own. Madison, however, was still struggling with her debts and hadn't been able to leave her parents' house. I offered for her to move in with me. Unfortunately, her financial situation meant she couldn't cover her share of the rent. To help, I agreed to cover 80% of it, leaving her with just 20%. She accepted, and we split utility bills equally. Although we had different jobs, Madison's was more demanding and required long hours on-site, while I had a corporate job with a flexible schedule. My boss didn't care if I worked from home or the office, as long as I met my monthly targets. Madison's job kept her too busy to help much around the house, so I took care of cooking, cleaning, laundry, and dishes. I didn't mind, understanding how exhausting her work was. The only task I asked her to handle was taking out the trash, since she was always the last one to eat. Unfortunately, she often forgot, leaving me to do it each morning. One weekend, I returned from work to find the house in complete chaos. The kitchen counter was covered with dirty dishes, empty food packets, and chocolate wrappers. The laundry had piled up, and the trash hadn't been taken out. Exhausted from my day, I couldn't relax with the house in such a mess. I spent hours cleaning, hoping Madison would notice and appreciate the effort. When she got home, she hugged me, saying how much she missed me, but she didn't even acknowledge the clean house. Instead, she sat down to watch TV, leaving me feeling frustrated and unappreciated. Overwhelmed, I burst into tears. When she noticed, she asked if something was wrong. I shook my head and said I was fine, pretending nothing was bothering me. Before heading to bed, I reminded her again to take out the trash, and she nodded. But the next morning, the trash was still there. When she came into the kitchen and asked for breakfast, I lost my temper. I told her she could cook for herself if she wanted to eat. She accused me of being rude, and that's when I snapped, yelling at her for being useless around the house. She looked at me, confused, as if she'd done nothing wrong, and told me to stop being dramatic. Taking a deep breath, I asked why she never took out the trash. She said she just kept forgetting. I then asked what she contributed to the house beyond coming home, sitting in front of the TV and drinking beer. She defended herself, saying she was always tired after work and deserved time to relax. I agreed, but asked, "What about me?" I reminded her that I came home from work, cooked for both of us, cleaned, did the laundry, and even ironed her shirts for the week. All I asked of her was to take out the trash. Madison replied that she never asked me to do any of those things. She continued to argue, saying her job was very demanding and, as her boyfriend, I should understand and help her. She even tried to justify it by claiming that doing chores wasn't a big deal since her father had always done the same for her mother. Hearing this made me furious. I realized that despite all my efforts to keep the house running smoothly, she was walking all over me, and we weren't even married. It struck me how unfair the situation was. Looking her in the eye, I told her firmly that I was done doing everything for her. I wasn't her father, and we were supposed to be equals. I made it clear that from now on, she would need to cook her own food, do her own laundry, iron her shirts, take out her trash, and clean up after herself. Madison's eyes widened in shock, and she began to protest. But I raised my hand to stop her and added something else. She also needed to pay 50% of the rent or move out. She was stunned and asked where all of this was coming from. I calmly told her I was exhausted from working so hard for her without feeling appreciated. She opened her mouth to say more, but I didn't let her. I walked out of the house, explaining I was already late for work. For the first time in my life, I had set such strong boundaries, and surprisingly, I didn't feel guilty about it. I stuck to my word and only cleaned up after myself. I stopped doing anything extra for her, and honestly, it felt empowering. It was oddly satisfying to watch her scramble around the house, trying to find clean clothes or ironing her shirts in a rush before work. She left the dishes unwashed and the trash untouched, hoping I would cave in and do it for her. But I refused. Even when the dirty dishes piled up and started to smell, I didn't budge. Instead, I switched to eating takeout and disposing of my garbage directly without setting foot in the kitchen. Madison tried to talk to me several times, insisting I should be a good partner and take care of her. But I stood firm and didn't give in to her demands. When it was time to pay rent, I only paid 50% of the total amount directly to our landlord and informed him that Madison would pay the rest. She came home furious, yelling that I should go back to covering 80% like before. But I refused. I reminded her that she had never appreciated me when I did all that, and I was done being taken for granted. She tried to make excuses, but in the end, she had no choice but to pay her share of the rent directly to the landlord. Despite everything, Madison never once apologized to me. She never sat down to express regret or acknowledge how much work I had done around the house. It was disappointing that she couldn't admit I was right about the situation. Looking back, I regret not seeing her true colors sooner. Over the next few months, our fights became more frequent and intense. She constantly blamed me for everything and tried to gaslight me into going back to my old ways. When I got a promotion at work, it seemed to be the final straw for Madison. One of our mutual friends, who also happens to be my co-worker, must have told her about it because that night turned into the worst fight of our relationship. Madison came home drunk and woke me up in the middle of the night, yelling that she needed to talk. She had clearly been out celebrating with her friends and was already hungover. I asked her if we could discuss it in the morning, but she insisted it was urgent. Groggy and irritated, I sat up in bed to hear her out, just to make her stop yelling. I asked her what was so important that it couldn't wait until morning. That's when Madison, slurring her words, began telling me about someone she'd met at work. I knew exactly who she was talking about. His name was Ben. I had met him at one of her office parties she'd invited me to. Ben was 27 years old, the son of a wealthy industrialist and clearly very rich. From what I had heard, he only worked because his father insisted he gain some experience. Madison drunkenly confessed that she was falling in love with him because, in her words, he was a real man, unlike me. I stood there, unable to move, as their cruel words washed over me. I had always suspected she might have taken advantage of my good nature, but hearing her say it so blatantly was devastating. Ben and Madison continued ridiculing me and mocking every aspect of our relationship. I wanted to burst into tears from the sheer humiliation, but I didn't want to let them see me in that vulnerable state. Quietly, I turned around and headed back upstairs. That night, I buried my face in my pillow and cried silently, feeling betrayed and heartbroken. The next morning, when I woke up, Madison and Ben were gone. She had taken the last of her belongings and officially moved out. As I walked around the house in a daze, it hit me that I was finally free of her. A wave of relief washed over me. I cried tears of happiness, knowing I would no longer have to deal with her toxicity. Then, I danced around the house in pure joy. Afterward, I spent the entire day cleaning the house, determined to erase every trace of her presence. In the weeks that followed, I thoroughly enjoyed living on my own. I stopped caring about the hurtful things Madison and Ben had said about me. I felt at peace, finally able to focus on myself and my happiness. Everything was going well until, 2 months later, a mutual friend informed me at work that Madison was getting married to Ben. I was caught off guard by how sudden it seemed. The friends showed me their engagement photos, and they appeared to be very happy together. While I felt a small pang of sadness over how Madison had used me, I also recognized that I would have never been satisfied with her in the long run. Deep down, I was glad she had found someone who seemed to make her happy. That evening, when I returned home and checked my mailbox, I found an unexpected envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation from Madison and Ben. My eyes widened in disbelief. At first, I thought it might have been a mistake or simply a courtesy invitation. But when I opened it, I noticed a handwritten note scrawled in the corner. It read, "I want you to attend my wedding so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Ben." As I read her words, it sank in that Madison had invited me purely to flaunt her wealth, her new life, and her relationship with Ben. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of why Madison would send me such a spiteful wedding invitation after everything I had done for her over the years. All the pent-up anger and frustration I had suppressed began bubbling to the surface. I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I decided that if she wanted to flaunt her grand life in front of me, I was going to make her regret it. I RSVP'd yes to her invitation. +1. A plan was already forming in my mind, and I was determined to see it through. Opening my laptop, I began scrolling through Ben's social media profiles. I meticulously analyzed every post he'd ever made, hoping to find something useful. After a long search, I finally struck gold. Just 6 months ago, Ben had broken up with his ex-girlfriend, Emily. His social media was filled with pictures of them together, and their posts dated back to high school, indicating that they had been in a serious, long-term relationship. I sent Emily a friend request. To my surprise, she accepted. Wasting no time, I messaged her, introducing myself as Madison's ex-boyfriend and explaining my plan to invite her as my +1 to the wedding. At first, Emily seemed intrigued and a bit skeptical, understandably curious about why I was reaching out to her. Over the next few weeks, we talked more, and I explained everything in detail. How Madison had used me for years, taken advantage of my kindness, and then mocked me alongside Ben. Emily gradually opened up and shared her own experiences. She revealed that Ben had cheated on her multiple times, with his most recent affair being with Madison. This revelation stunned me. I had no idea that Madison and Ben's relationship had started while he was still with Emily. Emily went on to explain how Ben had always been attracted to older women, so she wasn't entirely shocked when he announced he was in love with Madison while still dating her. Their breakup had been messy, and Emily had blocked Ben on all platforms after he suggested they remain friends. Despite everything, it was clear from the way Emily spoke about Ben that she still harbored some feelings for him. As we continued talking, I poured my heart out to Emily about my own experiences. I told her everything Madison had put me through, from how she had used me financially to how she and Ben had mocked me behind my back. Emily was horrified to hear how Madison had treated me and how callously she had spoken about me. After hearing my story, Emily finally agreed to accompany me to the wedding. I felt a wave of excitement as I imagined the look on Madison and Ben's faces when they saw me walking with Emily when I arrived at the wedding with Emily as my +1. The reaction was immediate. As expected, Madison's eyes widened in shock the moment she saw us walking in together. She must have recognized Emily as Ben's ex, ignoring her stunned expression. Emily and I calmly found our designated seats, pretending not to notice Madison's reaction. Moments later, Madison approached me, her face red with anger, and whispered furiously, "Why are you here with Ben's ex?" I simply smiled at her, refusing to engage. Realizing she couldn't cause a scene in front of everyone, she begrudgingly walked back to the aisle, shooting me one last glare. When it was time for the groom to make his entrance, everyone stood up. Ben looked sharp and confident in his black tuxedo as he walked down the aisle with his mother by his side. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, and soon the celebrations transitioned to the reception area. Later, Ben reappeared, now wearing a different suit for the reception. As he entered, his eyes scanned the room. At first, he didn't notice me or Emily, but then his gaze fell on us. He froze in his tracks, his confusion and disbelief written all over his face. Ben turned to look at me, then back at Emily, as if trying to process what he was seeing. The tension in the room rose, but Emily and I stayed calm, waiting to see how he would react. Ben, still stunned, turned to Emily and asked, "What are you doing here with him?" I smiled calmly and replied, "I invited her as my guest to show our support for your marriage." His expression darkened, and his voice grew sharp as he asked Emily, "Are you two dating now?" Emily remained silent, likely finding the question absurd, while Ben's face flushed red with anger. Sensing the growing tension, Emily suggested they speak privately to avoid causing a scene. Ben, though visibly irritated, nodded and shot me a venomous glance before walking away with Emily. I watched them leave, then turned my gaze toward Madison, who had been observing the entire exchange like a hawk. Although she appeared visibly concerned, she had no choice but to keep her composure and pretend everything was fine in front of the guests. The party continued as guests mingled and danced, seemingly unaware of the brewing drama. However, as time passed, people began to notice something unusual. Ben was nowhere to be seen. An hour went by, and whispers of confusion began circulating among the crowd. Ben's mother, now visibly worried, asked one of the groomsmen to check on him. A few minutes later, the groomsman returned, breathless, and holding a piece of paper in his hand. He quickly gathered everyone's attention and, with a shaky voice, announced that Ben had left. The room fell silent as the groomsman began reading the note aloud. In it, Ben confessed that seeing Emily at the wedding had brought back all his lingering feelings for her. He admitted he had made a mistake and couldn't go through with the marriage. And he had made a huge mistake marrying Madison. The revelation shocked the guests, leaving Madison standing there, humiliated and exposed. I was also quite surprised, as although I had brought Emily as my +1 to annoy Madison, I never expected things to turn out this way. Madison looked like she was ready to attack someone. Ben's parents politely asked everyone to leave and sincerely apologized for what had happened. I watched as Madison, once proud and boastful, stood there alone, completely stunned by Ben's decision. Since the wedding, I do feel a bit guilty, but at the same time, I can't help but feel pleased that Madison's attempt to humiliate me had backfired so badly. The event, meant to showcase her victory over me, had become the stage for her downfall. Am I the **whole ATA for bringing a special guest as my +1 and ruining my ex's wedding? I've received mixed reactions to my post since I shared my story. While many of you agree that I did the right thing, some think I went a little too far. I must clarify that it was never my intention to ruin my ex's wedding, nor did it come up in my conversation with Emily. I have no idea what Ben and Emily discussed privately for Ben to call off the wedding so quickly. I simply wanted to be petty with my ex, as she invited me in the first place with the hope of showing off by marrying a rich partner like Ben. I had nothing to do with Ben's decision to leave his marriage. I texted Emily, asking her about what happened, so I will update you next when she replies. Emily reached out to me. She sent me a long text yesterday where she basically expressed how thankful she was that I took her to the wedding. She told me that she and Ben had gone on the honeymoon that he was supposed to take with Madison. They had also spoken to his parents, as they were really concerned about him. She told me that she would be meeting with me soon to clarify everything in person. Meanwhile, Madison had been trying to reach me nonstop since the wedding. She called me multiple times and sent me nasty text messages, blaming me for the end of her marriage. I never replied to her, nor did I have any interest in engaging with her. I knew I had nothing to do with Ben and Emily running away together. Today, Madison decided to show up at my doorstep, knowing I would be home during the weekend. At first, I refused to open the door and asked her to leave. She kept yelling that she wouldn't leave until she talked to me. I opened the door just a little and told Madison that she wasn't allowed inside my house, but she could say whatever she wanted to me outside. Standing at my door, Madison started yelling at me, saying I had completely ruined her life. Apparently, she had already given her notice at work, thinking she would never have to work again after marrying someone as wealthy as Ben. She angrily asked me why I brought Emily to their wedding. I was starting to get frustrated with her blaming me, So I decided to tell her that I had heard everything that night when she spoke with Ben. Her eyes widened in shock as I told her I knew she had used me all along to cover her rent and pay for our dates during the years we dated. I told her I did all those things because I loved her, but clearly she had no respect for me. I told her that even when she cheated on me with Ben, I didn't make a big deal out of it, nor did I interfere in their relationship. It was only when she invited me to their wedding and wanted to show off her life in front of me. She was going to live with her rich partner, and that really pushed me over the edge. I told her she had no right to come to my place and yell at me for something I wasn't responsible for. Ben was an adult and had chosen to leave her, so she should be angry at him. Hearing this, Madison started yelling back that it wasn't her fault. I was so naive that I couldn't see how she had been using me all those years, and that I shouldn't punish her for the past. I scoffed when I heard this, while she kept going on about how Ben was supposed to change her life, and how she could have had everything she wanted. Finally, she revealed how hard she had worked to flirt with and seduce Ben, but I had ruined her chance. At this point, her words were so vile that I didn't want to hear them anymore, so I asked her to leave my property or I would call the police. She told me I would never dare do that, so I pulled out my phone and started dialing in front of her. She immediately stepped back and told me not to overreact, saying she was going to leave. I slammed the door, promising myself that this would be the last time I ever saw her. Since then, I blocked her on everything and told my family about the incident. I plan on changing my house locks and installing a camera on my door so that the next time she returns, I can record her behavior and file an official complaint against her. It's been a month since my last update. I've been very busy with work and didn't have time to update everyone who sent me 100 messages asking if Emily and I ever met. I'm happy to report that we finally did. Emily invited me for lunch a week ago, telling me she was ready to talk. When I arrived at the venue, I saw Ben sitting next to her. I immediately braced myself, thinking that he was here to start another fight with me. But to my surprise, when he saw me, he smiled politely and greeted me warmly. I was unsure of why he was here, but Emily reassured me that he was just there to apologize. Ben nodded and sincerely apologized for how he had spoken to me in the past. He then went on to tell me a story about Madison. He revealed how Madison would always be nice to him at work and give him a lot of attention because of their long work schedules. They spent a lot of time together, where Madison would always complain about me and our relationship. She would say how happy she was and that she wished she had a better-looking guy like Ben. He started to sympathize with her and felt flattered every time she complimented him. When he and Emily were going through a rough patch, he got carried away with his feelings and hooked up once with Madison. After that, Madison convinced him to break up with Emily, telling him that Emily wasn't good enough for him. Madison would continuously send him messages about how perfect he was for her and how they could have a life together. He felt guilty for cheating on Emily, so he eventually broke up with her. He thought he could be happy with Madison despite their apparent age difference. Ben then explained how, when he saw me, he felt insecure about how independent I was and became jealous that I didn't really need a woman to take care of me. He apologized for hurting my feelings. I understood where he was coming from and went on to tell him how hard I had worked all my life to reach this position at work. He nodded solemnly, his eyes down. I then asked him to explain what had happened during his wedding with Madison. He revealed that when I brought Emily to the wedding, he was shocked to see her. He realized, looking at her face, just how much he was still in love with her and how he never felt the same way for Madison. Emily told me that when they had privately discussed this during the wedding, they realized that they both felt the same way about each other. So, they decided to run away together after Ben left a note for his family. They've been together ever since and are very much in love. I was also informed that he had talked with his parents about this. Although they were very angry at first, they eventually decided to support him. He was going to file for an annulment with Madison very soon. Hearing this, although it didn't entirely sit right with me, I was satisfied that at least two people were happy after the disastrous events. I could see how happy Ben and Emily looked at each other. We had our lunch, talked some more, and eventually left. Since that conversation, I haven't spoken to either of them much, nor do I want to be a part of their drama. I plan on focusing on myself and continuing to work hard at my job. I don't know what will happen with Madison, but I hope that she can eventually learn from her mistakes and not chase after partners for money in the future.